Early warning system, understanding risk for school dropout and promoting pathways to successful outcomes during middle school. Developmental vulnerabilities and opportunities in adolescence. In the adolescent development module, we learned that all students may have positive outcomes when their characteristics and context align to promote their strengths and adaptation. Middle school is a time when youth experience many challenges. That includes increased academic demands, more complex relationships with teachers and peers, and expectations for self-regulated behavior. It is also a period of developmental opportunity when youth can establish new identities, relationships, and behavior patterns that serve as turning points for positive outcomes in school success. This module will examine early warning signs of risk for school dropout and consider ways that teachers can use this information to promote positive developmental pathways and outcomes for students with EVD. Here we're really focusing on understanding the risk and vulnerabilities for school dropout, but at the same time we want to think about how do we create opportunities for students that reduce the likelihood that those risks will be manifested in problems and eventual school dropout. A student and context perspective of middle school adaptation. Youth develop holistically. This means that their academic, behavioral, emotional, and social functioning are interdependent. There are 4 primary demands in school: academic achievement, self-regulation of behavior, self-regulation of emotions, cognitions, and developing social competencies and positive relations. Cultural and ecological factors contribute to the strengths and needs that students bring to their classroom, and students in the same class can experience the classroom and context in very different ways. How youth experience the context contributes to their adaptation, their patterns of behavior, and their long-term outcomes. By managing the context to build on students' strengths, enhance their competencies, and carefully promoting the negotiation of areas of difficulty, teachers can foster positive developmental trajectories for youth who are at risk for poor outcomes like academic failure and school dropout. Strengths and school dropout. We're returning to the Figure 1 model on correlated constraints that we presented in our first module on adolescent development. As presented in that model, the term correlated constraints refers to the fact that because students develop holistically, their functioning in one domain is likely to contribute to and support similar or complementary levels of functioning in other domains. That means that how students function in one domain is likely to impact and promote similar types of functioning in the other domain. Youth who are at risk for school dropout tend to experience problems across multiple domains of school functioning. So from that perspective, it means that we need to look at that inner ring factors: the academic functioning, the behavioral functioning, the social functioning, and the educational mindset and goals for the future, and think about how those all operate together as a system. But then we don't simply focus on those without considering the context. We want to understand how the classroom context and how the broader developmental ecology in the home and the community, how those factors come together to contribute to the student's immediate functioning. And that can help us think about how students might be vulnerable and are at risk, and then how can we leverage these factors to support strengths and to reduce the negative impact of those risks. Indicators of developmental risk and the early warning system, the EWS. For decades, developmental researchers have identified factors in prior school years that predict important student outcomes, such as academic failure and school dropout. These factors include school absences, poor academic achievement, suspensions and expulsions, and social problems. When sustained trends, which means patterns over time of difficulty in those domains are evident, they serve as an important indicator for identifying youth who are at risk for dropping out of school. The early warning system that was developed by Balfance and his colleagues uses school record data pertaining to attendance, academic failure, and behavioral problems to identify middle school students who are at risk for subsequent dropout. The ABCs of the early warning system. The EWS data on trends in students' academic performance, school attendance, and behavioral difficulties can help us identify students who are at high risk for school dropout. The ABC framework. In Pennsylvania, teachers receive EWS data about student attendance. A stands for school absences, and then behavior, the B stands for discipline referrals, and then course performance, C, for school grades, with information about trends over time. So the ABC framework is school absences, discipline referrals, and school grades. As Neal et al. Suggest, the ABC data of the EWS are surface indicators of deeper academic problems, behavioral issues, or responses to the home or school environment that schools need to identify and address. That means that the ABC system or the ABC framework of the EWS, that while we're collecting data about student attendance, about their discipline referrals, and about their school grades, those data combined can give us a strong sense of which students are at increased risk for dropping out. But those information, those data alone will not tell us how specifically to support the students. So what Neal and all are saying in their article, when they say that these are surface indicators, it means these are indicators that are telling us there's a problem. But then we need to be able to look at what's happening in the context, going back to the dynamic systems developmental framework, that framework of understanding the individual in context. We need to look at how these kids are responding to aspects of their home or school environment that are contributing to their difficulties in development, and we need to identify those factors and address them. So the EWS data can help guide teachers in both the prevention and treatment of chronic EBD and poor outcomes. It helps us by giving us those early warning signals of here are the students that are on a pathway towards school dropout, but then we have to do a bit of detective work to figure out what are the things that are occurring in the child's life, in their home, in the school, in the classroom context, that we can modify those experiences in ways that support and sustain positive pathways away from school dropout. The early warning system, EWS metrics. How to identify students off track for graduation based on ABC data. Here we see a table with 6 columns. The 3 leftmost columns provide the metrics, the description of those metrics, and the calculation, how we go about making a numerical count of those metrics. Then the 3 far right columns, the color-coded columns, those are telling us whether or not those metrics are green, on track, yellow, in the warning zone, or red, off track, in a danger zone. Off track meaning that the student has characteristics that would suggest that they're at risk for dropping out of school. So Looking at the first line under the EWS metrics, we see A for attendance. Then going across for the description, we're simply looking at the daily attendance rate. And so that is a percentage of the number of days the student was in attendance during the current school year versus the number of school days during the current school year. So that gives us a percentage. We put the number of days that they have attended over the possible number of days they could attend to get a percentage. So a student who has attended for more than 90% of possible school days, they are on track. A student who has attended between 80% and 90%, they're in the warning zone. And a student who's attended for less than 80%, they are in a danger zone. Next, the next line, B, behavior school code of conduct. The description is the number of school code of conduct violations during the current school year. And this is calculated with the count of incidents where the infraction category is school code of conduct violation. Students who are in the green area are between 0 and 3 overall infractions. Students who are in the warning zone are 4 to 5 infractions, and students who have more than 5 school code of conduct violations are considered to be in the red zone and are at risk for school dropout. We also have a second line for behavior that's the state reportable offenses. And so that's simply the descriptor is that these are the numbers of state reportable offenses during the current school year. And that's calculated with the count of the number of incidents where the infraction category is state reportable offense. And green on track is 0, yellow warning is also no offenses, and then red off track is more than 0 offenses. So 1 or more in the infraction category for state reportable offenses, that places the student at risk for school dropout. C, we have the first line, course grades, mathematics. And here the descriptor is simply mathematics course grade for the most recent grading period. And this is the numeric course grade value. So if the grade is greater than 70, the student is on track. If the grade is between 60 and 70, the student is in the yellow warning area. And if the grade is below 60, the student is viewed as being off track and in danger for school dropout. Then the final C, course grades for English language arts. The descriptor is the English language arts course grade for the most recent grading period. And the calculation there is simply the numeric course grade value. If the student's grade is greater than 70, they're on track. If their grade is between 60 and 70, they're in the warning zone. And if their grade is below 60, then they're in the off track in that area that we feel is at risk for school dropout. The EWS and the prevention of poor outcomes. As shown in the EWS metrics slide, there are specific guidelines for students being on track. With green, students are on track. In the warning zone, yellow, and off track, red. There are 3 ways to think about these data in terms of prevention. First, we want to prevent on-track students from moving into the warning, the yellow zone, in any of the ABC metrics. Second, we want to prevent warning zone students from moving into the off-track red zone on any of the ABC metrics. And third, Consistent with the correlated constraints perspective, we want to prevent problems in any one of the ABC metrics from promoting problems in the other metrics or domains. That is, we want to prevent students from having pervasive problems that extend across the ABCs, across attendance, behavior, and course performance. Building from EWS surface indicators to preventive intervention. As Neild et al. Describe, the EWS factors of school attendance, behavior problems, discipline referrals, and course performance are surface indicators of future school dropout. This means that problem trends in each of these factors serve as signals that there are likely to be day-to-day difficulties in a student's functioning that contributes to these problems. For example, if a student is having attendance problems, it is helpful to determine if they are due to illness, a sense of not belonging in school, a sense that they cannot be successful in school, school phobia, fear of being harmed on the way to school or being bullied in school, issues at home that interfere with school attendance, hanging out with peers who encourage skipping class, or some combination of any of the above. Each of these issues can operate as developmental process factors that contribute to school adjustment problems and eventual school dropout. Similar considerations can be made for discipline referrals and poor course performance. The goal is to clarify individual, that is, student level factors, and context, that is, factors in the classroom, in the school, in the peer group, in the family or the neighborhood, factors at those levels that are developmental process factors that may be contributing to the problem. For students in the green and yellow zone, the goal of prevention is to identify problems as they are emerging, determine the developmental process factors that may be contributing to the problem, and develop corresponding supports to reduce the likelihood of a manifestation of the problem. So when the student is either in the green zone or the yellow zone, we're trying to keep problems from emerging and moving into that red zone and becoming a true danger for school dropout. Correlated constraints, students with EBD, and the prevention of pathways to school dropout. By definition, students with EBD are likely to experience difficulties in developmental process factors that are linked to one or more of the EWS ABCs. The concept of correlated constraints can help us think about the prevention of risk for dropout for youth with EBD. From a prevention perspective, it is important to focus not only on keeping the immediate problem from getting worse, but from also spreading across the system. If the student has behavior problems, we want to reduce the problem behavior. We also want to keep the behavior from causing academic problems and school attendance problems. Likewise, if a student has academic problems, we want to keep them from becoming behavior and or attendance problems. Finally, if a student is having attendance problems, we want to keep those from becoming academic and or behavior problems. Correlated constraints, students with EBD, and the treatment of students who are off track across multiple domains. The concept of correlated constraints can help us think about providing treatment for students who have multiple risks for school dropout. If a student has problems across all three domains, it is necessary to move from prevention to treatment. This is because the entire system is organized to support problems and the student is manifesting a trajectory of adjustment problems that has an elevated probability of leading to school dropout. In this case, it is necessary to focus on reorganizing the student's entire developmental system by doing the following. First, building the student's competencies in the areas of difficulty. Next, identifying strengths and promoting a context that reinforces the strengths and the student's eventual success in school. And then finally, coordinating services across domains and relevant agencies. Student-level developmental process factors and interventions. Going back to correlated constraints and the idea of what causes the cake, it is likely that not one but many factors contribute to a student's attendance, behavior, and course performance problems. This may include content-related academic skills, information processing and memory skills, behavior and/or emotion regulation skills, mindset about learning and achievement, academic and social goals, sense of belonging in school, and sense of school success. As we focus on intervening in one area, it is necessary to also be attuned to how other areas may impact the student's adjustment. It is often necessary to make adaptations and supports across several factors or domains to promote a system that enhances the student's overall adjustment and success in school. Context-level developmental process factors and interventions. When we make a cake, it is not only the ingredients that go into the cake that matter. Other factors such as the mixing utensils, pans, stove, temperature, and even the skills and motivation of the cook impact how the cake turns out. This is also the case for the outcome of students. Student school adjustment and high school completion are impacted by context factors such as relationships with school adults and/or school peers, the classroom social context, school rules and discipline practices, alignment of students' social and cultural background with the school climate, teachers' support and capacities to meet students' needs, teachers' views about students' potential for success, and availability of resources and supports in the home and community. Interventions at the context level are necessary to address factors in the school or community that may be contributing to students' adjustment problems, and it is necessary to develop supports for areas of difficulty. Student and context perspective of tailored interventions. As we intervene with students, we must be aware that the opportunities, experiences, and relationships they have can either constrain or enhance the impact of student-focused interventions. We must manage classroom and school context to support students' adaptation and the success of individual-focused interventions. This includes teachers being attuned to cultural factors and classroom social dynamics and how these factors may interact with individually focused interventions. Teachers can use their understanding of cultural and social dynamic factors to tailor the context and specific interventions to the experiences, strengths, and needs of specific students. Bringing it all together, the early warning system helps us to identify emerging patterns or trends for dropout early on and intervene before the problems become severe. By looking at problems across the ABCs, the EWS helps us to identify students who have difficulties across multiple domains and who are at greatest risk for school dropout, i.e. those who need treatment. Pairing the EWS with the concept of correlated constraints makes it possible for us to tailor strategies to students and to associated developmental process risk factors. As we intervene to support students, we need to go beyond addressing problems and building strengths in students. We must also focus on the context, including being attuned to cultural and social factors that help us understand their behavior and how they can be successful both in the classroom and in the community. Now we have some scenarios and application activities to help you think about these concepts and how they look in the classroom and how we may utilize these concepts to help us understand specific students and understand where we can leverage certain developmental process factors to enhance their functioning in the classroom, their success, their sense of belonging, and to promote developmental pathways that prevent against dropping out of school. Scenario 1 and application activity. For scenario 1, let's consider Alexandra. Alexander liked elementary school because he had a teacher who really understood him and helped him be successful in the subjects he struggled in, math, reading, and writing. In middle school, he seems to do nothing well. He struggles to follow along in class. He is concerned that other students will laugh at him. He has started to hang around with classmates who skip class. He thinks his teachers don't like him, and he is acting like school is not important. So first, let's consider, how can you support Alexander and promote his school adjustment? What individual factors would you address and what might you do? Also, what context factors would you address and what might you do? And then finally, how can you monitor the interplay between individual and context factors and address this interplay as you intervene? Scenario 2 and application activity. For scenario 2, let's consider Candace. Candace is in 6th grade and is a bright student who is streetwise and socially mature for her age. She is physically mature as well and looks like she should be in high school. She has begun dating older boys and has stopped hanging around with classmates who are focused on academic achievement. Candace wants to do well in school. However, she doesn't complete her homework and is often tired and distracted in class. She is frequently late to class and becomes irritated when teachers comment on her behavior. How can you support Candace and promote her school adjustment? What individual factors would you address and what might you do? What context factors would you address and what might you do? And how can you monitor the interplay between individual and context factors and address this interplay as you intervene? Resources and references. The following resources and references can help you to further explore the concepts we've talked about today and to consider how to address them in the classroom and how to identify potential strategies and leverage points that further support the students that you're trying to enhance their achievement and their success in your classes. The first article, Social Acceptance in Inclusive Classrooms, the Role of Teacher Attitudes Toward Inclusion in Classroom Management, is in Frontiers in Education. It is an open source journal, and you can click on this link and it will take you directly to the article. And it's an article that shows that teachers' implementation of clear rules and time management increase the social acceptance of students. So the point behind this article is that when teachers provide a well-structured classroom context that helps students manage their time and helps them follow rules and do things in an organized manner, it often increases the social acceptance of students who are socially vulnerable. The next article, Teacher Behavior with Upper Elementary School Students in the Social Margins of the Classroom Peer Group. This article shows that teachers are less likely to interact positively with socially marginalized students. But when teachers do interact positively with marginalized or rejected students, they are more likely to be accepted by classmates over time. And this article is also in Frontiers in Education, and it's really saying that you, as the leader of the class, how you behave and engage with those students who are socially vulnerable, you can be the anchor to be part of a turning point of their social experiences. The final article, Supporting the Inclusion of Socially Vulnerable Early Adolescents, Theory and Illustrations of the BASE Model, is an article we suggested before, that its relationship to the concepts we talked about today really center on how do the academic, the behavioral, and social factors come together, how are they related to your everyday routine management of the classroom, and how can we manage that classroom context in ways that the most struggling students, the students who have difficulties across the academic, behavioral, and social domains, the students who have those ABC risk, those students who are most likely to be identified from the early warning system, how do we create an overall context by the way we manage instruction, classroom behavior, and the social ecology? How can we create that classroom context that really supports them and helps them be successful day to day, moment to moment?